Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of Eastern Planning Committee. My name is Penny Rivers and I chair this committee. Please keep your statements brief and to the point, and we have 3 speakers this evening. So we come to agenda item number 1, apologies. Kissy, are there any?
Yes, we have apologies from Councillor Else and Councillor Sadler.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And minutes of the last meeting, members, do you confirm the minutes of the last meeting, which was held on 23rd of November, which are published on the website? Thank you. And declarations of interest. Kissy, are there any?
There are no declarations of interest, none have been made to me.
Thank you. Questions by members of the public. Are there any?
No questions, I'm afraid, Chair.
Thank you. And questions by members? I think there are none.
None, Chair.
Thank you. So agenda item number 6, any relevant updates? Chris.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members. This is one short update. With regards to local plan part 2, members will be aware that the schedule for main modifications following the examination of the local plan has been published, and that is now out to public consultation. More weight can therefore be given to the unmodified policies. In terms of tonight's applications, I can confirm this does not have any bearing on tonight's recommendations. The consultation runs until Friday, the 27th of January. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Now we come to our applications, and we have our first one tonight is WA 2002-00512, Langhurst Farm, Lodkin Hill, Hascombe. James, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Can everybody see that?
Yeah, we can see the file.
Okay, this is an application for the change of use of 2 agricultural barns to business use, and also to include partial demolition, the cladding of the barns, and the removal of the grain silo and various other elements of the site. Hard and soft landscaping, and the cladding element has already been carried out. So here we have the location plan, the red line site area, and you can see the subject site in the middle there, and the access road, which is a private way connecting onto Lodkin Hill at the northwest side. This is much the same view, just with the aerial photography. The subject site indicated by the blue dot, and then you can see the access track leading to the main road. Some photos now. This shows the existing access from the track to the site, with barn A in the foreground. This is a shot from within the site looking back to the access road. This is looking west, so the 2 barns on the left-hand side of shot. Another one looking north from the rear of the site, barn B on the far right of shot, barn A in the centre, and the silo on the left-hand side. This is a shot from a little bit further back, again shows both the barns, barn B in the foreground, silo on the left. And this is looking west, again both barns you can see behind the trees, barn B on the left hand side and barn A on the right. This is a shot of the existing silo, which is proposed to be removed as part of the application. In the foreground there is a caravan, which is currently unauthorised. This is the easterly element of barn B, so the bit where the roof slopes back up on the left-hand side. That element would be demolished with the remainder of barn B being retained, which you can see there on the right-hand side of shots. So this is a proposed site plan. So they've labelled it barns 1 and 2 on here. What we're calling barn A is the northerly barn, the larger barn, and barn B, what we are calling barn B, is the southerly barn. You see the parking, the landscaping, and to the right-hand side of barn B, on the south side, is an area of land which currently is where that extension is, which you just saw in the photograph. That would be removed. And now the proposed elevations and floor plans, they are much the same as shown in the photographs. So this is the elevations of barn A as proposed. And the floor plan proposed for barn A. And this is the elevations proposed for barn B. And you can see on the left-hand side there, the dashed line indicating the element to be removed. And the floor plan for barn B, again with the hashed area on the right-hand side, showing the bit to be removed. And these are 2 shots showing the previous appearance of the barns prior to the cladding work being carried out, courtesy of Hascombe Parish Council. On the left-hand side is barn A. So that is the historic appearance of barn A. And on the right-hand side, barn B. And it's slightly small there, but on the right-hand side, the left-hand side of the right-hand shot, and you can just about see that element which is proposed to be removed as part of the current application. So the key issues on this one, the Bramley Neighbourhood Plan, the main policy in the Bramley Neighbourhood Plan, G1, does direct commercial development to some centres in Bramley, of which this is not one of those centres. It does include a caveat as to development which is relevant to the rural economy. So one of the key questions is whether this development is relevant to the rural economy. The impact of the green belt, which is essentially whether the openness of the area and what effect is had with that. And we're looking at the addition of the cladding and the removals proposed. The impact of the AONB, so the nature of the use, the intensity of the use, the traffic movements that would arise from that in character terms, and the wider context, which as the applicant has set out, the proceeds of this would aim to support wider land management objectives within the AONB. And then the highways impact. Now, just to note, the Highway Authority have not objected to this. And finally, there's a couple of brief updates to the report. The parish on the report, the report header on page 11 of the pack gives the parish as Hascombe. Now, just to clarify that the access is within Hascombe, but the actual buildings are within Bramley. And the development has been assessed against the Bramley Neighbourhood Plan. And also in the report, page 12 of the pack gives the relevant planning history. And just to note, we have had an application in, which is still under consideration, for the retention of that caravan on a temporary basis. And that caravan is at the moment unauthorised. And just following on from that, and just to clarify that the Greenbelt assessment set out in the report at pages 14 and 15 does not hinge upon the presence of the caravan. So my assessment of the scheme is based on the removals of the silo and the barn B element, as we've seen in the photographs. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, James. Now we come to our speakers. We have Mr. Pedder to speak first. Thank you.
Good evening. I speak for the objectors, all 16 of us. My family have lived in Langhurst Valley for over 80 years, and I will start with an overview of agricultural conversions in the area. In order to convert, you need to show there is no demand for agricultural buildings. This application has not done so because there is plenty of demand from Mr. Hutley's own family. His sister is building 2 new barns in neighbouring Thorncombe Street, one of 500 square metres. A year ago, he himself applied for a new barn of 250 square metres just over the hill from this site. Strange that more buildings are needed when old ones aren't. Could this be a strategy of build anew and convert the old? Mr. Hutley is not a poor farmer seeking to diversify. He describes himself on his website as responsible for purchasing investment property and assembling development sites. He bought Langhurst Farm in 2017. Initially, he clad the open barns, as we've heard, without authorization. He was stopped by a planning contravention notice. In January this year, he applied for 600 square metres full Class E on this site to local outrage. He dialed back to a potentially sensible 350 square metres. But Clive Smith, the respected advisor to the AONB, objected, suggesting possible removal of Barn B altogether. This objection was a showstopper. Then Savills came up with an idea: buy off the AONB with visions of country stewardship schemes elsewhere in the AONB. When offered those wider benefits, Clive was forced to admit, "I do not consider that I can justifiably seek refusal of this application on AONB grounds." Success, and the application was immediately increased to its current 520 square metres. That's how we got here, but you must now consider the case on the planning merits on this site. The country stewardship scheme will not apply to this site. If you were to consider the wider potential benefits to the AONB, as Clive understandably has, and the officer's report does, that would not survive a judicial review. Then there's the poverty card. We're told that Mr. Hutley can't afford his wider sustainability objectives without the income from the Langhurst site. Well, it's the taxpayer who would pay for much of that sustainability. And to make up the difference, surely Mr. Hutley can divert some of the advertised £6,000 per month he receives from letting Langhurst next door. Or he could sell the site once he's got planning permission. It wouldn't be personal to him. Excuse my dwelling on Mr. Hutley's circumstances. That's what the officer's report does. And you must understand the context, a strategy of converting agricultural buildings across the family estates under a smokescreen of environmental benefits. As for the application itself, it is a massive overdevelopment of a small agricultural unit. When I used to work there, we had 1 or 2 people on site. 17 are now proposed. That's some 10-fold increase in intensity. The traffic estimate is for 77 movements per day, compared with 14 for agricultural use. Those vehicles will arrive up a private drive serving 2 houses from a single lane byway with many steep blind bends. There will be 16 cars parked in the open, visible from the busy adjacent bridleway. This small agricultural holding will become a business park. This would surely be a major development under Section 176 of the NPPF, requiring exceptional circumstances for anything that does not conserve the AONB. None are offered. You must not allow a business park to desecrate this isolated and secluded valley. If you are frightened by the prospects of an appeal, in 2016, the inspector rejected a previous appeal on this site for 245 square metres, less than half of what is now proposed. Over to you.
Thank you very much. And now I call Mr. Hutley to speak in support.
Press the button. Good afternoon, good evening. Difficult to reply because the sister, not me, has bought and developed a series of agricultural buildings on the Winchell estate. They're not mine, so I don't think they're relevant. And just the caravan has been occupied by an ex-serviceman who's suffering from post-traumatic stress. He's now been housed somewhere else. This application has taken 2.5 years. Clearly, it is controversial because no one wants to see change of use when you live nearby. However, I am not increasing the size of the scheme. In fact, it's being somewhat reduced. I am going to make sure that it is absolutely developed or converted into a rural business units for artisans. I've got a lot of potential local tenants who are very interested in occupying the space. I've had a ground source heat pump company. I've had a manufacturer of coffee and blended exotic coffee blends, a garden furniture maker, local ambulance service. Obviously, I've got a lot of artist studios, pottery studios, jewelry designs. My accountant would be interested. Yes, it is a change of use from agriculture to business, but that is part of policy. And I can assure you, and I know from Mr. Pedder as my neighbor, I live there, and I want to make sure that the tenants, the local occupiers, the local businesses are of the right caliber, not to create havoc and cause offense. Clearly, we know what government policy is for the conversion of rural buildings. It's been 2.5 years to get to where we are. I can assure you it will be an improvement than a redundant yard as it is at the moment. So I'm not going to say any more. The report is the report, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Hutley. And now I call on Councillor Sarah Sullivan.
The proposed development and its associated curtilage will result in an intensification of this deeply rural location. Originally, these open-sided buildings were linked to the management, maintenance of the land and used for agricultural purposes. The conversion into industrial sheds will result in an isolated large-scale development in the countryside and must be considered as harmful as they introduce an activity which will adversely affect the character and amenities of this valley. There are no special circumstances which outweigh the identified harm. The officer's report fails to point out clearly in National Planning Policy Framework 2021, paragraph 176, great weight should be given to conserving landscape and scenic beauty in AONB. These are areas which have the highest status of protection in relation to the landscape and scenic beauty. Planning permission should be refused for major developments in these designated areas, except in exceptional circumstances and where it can be demonstrated that they are in the public interest. They are to be considered here are in the impacts of the development on the wider landscape within the Surrey Hills, harm to the landscape and biodiversity. There has been no landscape assessment submitted. The NPPF states it is a matter for the decision maker if the proposal is a major development. Footnote 60 of NPPF, for purposes of paragraph 176 and 177, whether a proposal is a major development is a matter for the decision maker, taking into account its nature, scale, setting, and whether it could have a significant adverse impact on the purposes for which the area has been designated or defined. The proposal would seriously harm this tranquil valley, and the proposed usage would have no functional relationship with the rural landscape. Sensitive. The relative tranquility being one of the special qualities of the AONB. The site is just 46.2 meters from a watercourse, 49 meters from a large lake, and it adjoins wetland habitat. The biodiversity checklist incorrectly states no pond within 200 meters. The surface area of the lake exceeds 3,000 square meters, far in excess of the 225 square meters on the form, and there are great crested newts that have been observed on this application site. Increase in traffic movements of the proposed development is 550%, and therefore needs to be considered as significant. The proposal is 520 square metres in the AO and B. Change of use from agricultural usage to business, as stated, has far greater harmful impacts. Permission normally runs with the land, but the use in this application has not been restricted to personal. Environmentally sensitive site. The Surrey Wildlife Trust commented on a previous smaller scheme without the benefit of an ecological appraisal. Works will inevitably spread out around the site and will lead to further encroachment and erosion. There are no legal agreements put in place to mitigate the harm caused, just promises that have no capacity for enforcement whatsoever and no landscape assessment. We consider this application should be refused. It will result in harm to the character of this intrinsic landscape quality of this tranquil rural setting. The proposal should be considered as inappropriate form of development in the Greenbelt, contrary to local plan policies and against the advice of the NPPF 2021 July. The Hascombe Parish Council strongly urges the council to refuse this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sullivan. I forgot to say that you are the chair of Hascombe Parish Council.
And I can't send it.
So, members, it's your time now to speak. Councillor Seaborn.
Sorry, Chair, I'm not actually sitting on the committee today, but I did ask Democratic Services and had an acknowledgement earlier in the week that for permission to speak as the ward member. So might I do that? Thank you. So I'm going to start by thanking James for pointing out the two items that I'd spotted in his report. The fact that the site is in Bramley Parish and Hascombe is relevant because as it stands, the application is covered by the Bramley Neighbourhood Plan, which was made in January this year. And then secondly, the outstanding application for the caravan, which was validated in August 2021 and is now 14 months past its target date for determination, covered the siting of the touring caravan for a period of only 12 months. So this application has not been determined, and in any case, the 12-month period for which the application was made has expired. So consequently, the removal of the touring caravan, which I understand has been empty for months, as covered in the proposal in section 3, I don't really think it should be part of the consideration because it shouldn't be there. In general, I can sympathise with rural landowners trying to make rural enterprises viable. This is also the view taken by the Bramley Neighbourhood Plan. The officer report correctly points out that the plan is sympathetic to rural landowners bringing forward conversion projects. I'd assert, though, it does lack attention to some of the detail of the relevant policies. So in policy BNP G1, which is the spatial plan for Bramley, which has been mentioned, it says, subject to AONB and Greenbelt national and local policy, economic or commercial enterprises, and now I'm going to stress, specifically relevant to the rural economy and AONB, such as forestry management and land-based businesses, are encouraged to bring forward development opportunities, including any with the AONB, within the AONB and Greenbelt. So the stress there is on the rural aspect of it rather than general business. And then policy BNPL3, which is supporting the rural economy, states, this plan supports appropriate schemes that enable the growth of Bramley's rural economy, in particular, the development and diversification of agricultural and other land-based rural businesses through the conversion of existing buildings will be supported. So conversion of the buildings is fine. What I'd like members to dwell on is what it's going to end up. The reality is that this application does not attempt to develop or diversify an agricultural or land-based business. It seeks to allow a range of businesses which have don't necessarily have anything to do with the rural economy. So if you do end up agreeing to support the officer recommendation, can I ask that conditions are strengthened, I think probably condition 12, to ensure that any businesses operating on the site are genuinely linked to the rural economy, so that this application does not allow the transplant of urban businesses to a rural setting. Mr. Hutley, I think, intimated that was his desire. And I guess what I'm asking for is that the conditions are strengthened so that the desire becomes a hard enforceable one rather than a promise. The other point I'd like to make, which I don't think is adequately covered, is access to the site. Commercial activities, by definition, usually involve visits to the site by customers and suppliers who are not familiar with the area. I can just about accept that access from the east, from Godalming or Cranley, is probably acceptable for the expected number of vehicles. However, the situation is completely different from vehicles coming from the south side of Guildford and using SatNav. These are likely to be directed from Bramley along Snowdenham Lane, Thorncombe Street and Lodkin Hill. Much of this route is single track with limited opportunity to pass. I think this aspect should be actually pushed back to the Highways Authority, as we've done in the past when we don't think they've done an adequate job, for further consideration. And then if after thinking through the issue, they are still happy that the impact on this stretch of road is acceptable, then in my view, a condition should be added restricting travel from the north just to cars and small vans. This route is totally unsuitable for anything larger than a transit van, so residents living along this route should be protected through a condition. And just as a closing point, I visited the site yesterday and had to reverse twice during the course of a 3-kilometre journey due to traffic coming in the opposite direction. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Seaborne. We have Councillor Townsend, followed by Councillor Dinas, followed by Councillor Follows. So Councillor Townsend.
Thank you, Chair. I've just got a few questions, really with regard to the Surrey Wildlife Trust. First of all, I would like to know why there were no ecological surveys carried out. And also, whilst there is mention in the condition about lighting, there's clearly been mention about, you know, the need for bat mitigation license to apply for that, bat roosting opportunities, although they think they're quite small, but the lighting around it, you know, the lighting, if there is going to be any development on this site, then the lighting should be bat friendly, so to speak, lighting. There needs to be the condition about the birds, there needs to be the condition about the trees, as has been mentioned by the Surrey Wildlife Trust, enhancing biodiversity as well, and also the SEMP. And there doesn't seem to be a condition about the SEMP either that I can see. Please point it out if I've overlooked it. And just generally as well, I mean, we're introducing quite a number of new people onto this site, as well as obviously traffic issues, but the sewage as well and the water supply, where is that going to come from? Have Thames Water been contacted? Can they provide adequate coverage here for water and sewage? You know, the fact that it's a change of use does mean that it's a change of use by a lot of humans, which come with all kinds of human bits and bobs stuff. Thank you, Councillor Follows, stuff. And so I do think that there are a lot, for me, there are a lot of holes here. And also the type of businesses, whilst, you know, supporting the local economy and having businesses here, I wasn't sure from what we've been told tonight, if there were going to be quite a few visitors to this site, if it was going to be artisans that were selling stuff. Is that going to be something where it's going to attract a lot of visitors? Again, that isn't clear to me at this particular moment in time. So I've got lots of queries about the biodiversity and the Surrey Wildlife Trust and the comments that they've made, and also generally about the sewage and whether or not they were consulted with, bearing in mind all the problems we face in the borough. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, if I can just pick up on some of that. I might not have got every point, but I can pick up most of them. Just firstly to address Councillor Seaborne's point about the rural businesses, I think we would have difficulty conditioning that because it's not a specific use class. So I think condition 12, which was referred to, is a use restriction based on class E or class EG. Which is a particular class within the use classes order. It would be very difficult to come up with a form of wording that would work to define a rural business, because it's quite a subjective thing. And then coming on to some of Councillor Townsend's points, the Surrey Wildlife Trust response is addressed on page 16 of the pack, and they haven't actually recommended very many conditions, although we can certainly beef up some of them, particularly around birds I think there was another one that was mentioned.
CMP, I think is really good answer.
Yeah, the CMP is actually condition 3 on page 18, so that has been added. Then the drainage and sewerage, we would be conditioning sustainable drainage scheme, and the sewerage, which is briefly addressed at the bottom of page 16, is a building regulations matter, and that would need to be covered because it is a material change of use. That would be as part of the building regs. We wouldn't need to duplicate that at this stage. Do remind me if there are any more. I think.
Yes, the number of visitors and the lighting scheme. Thank you.
Yes, the visitors, so the use class permitted EG would not permit the retail sale of goods at the site. So it would be purely employment, business. So it's office, essentially it's office, research and development, or light industrial, which is defined as an industrial use that does not impact neighbouring amenity. So they are the uses that would be permitted. There would be no sort of customers driving up, buying something and driving away. That would need a separate bit of Class E, which we're not allowing. And as to the access, which I think Councillor Seaborn raised, concerns about access from the north, I'm not sure whether we could adequately enforce that. We do have a construction transport management plan, but of course that would only cover the construction phase. It would not cover ongoing use. Whether we could attach a condition that says you shall not access this site from the north is possibly a little difficult to enforce. Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, Chairman, and I forgot, my first point was why no surveys were carried out as well. Perhaps there could be some explanation as to why we didn't ask for any bat surveys, you know, etc. surveys around there.
Yeah, I think the short answer probably is the form of the buildings is not changing very much. So we're not dealing with new buildings, we're not dealing with major extensions. And again, Surrey Wildlife Trust have not actually requested one. And usually if it is something that is material, they would request that if it's not provided. So that's why we didn't require one in this instance.
Thank you, James. Councillor Denis.
Thank you and good evening. I think James put up one of the slides, which was matters for consideration. So I thought I'd just go through some of those. First one was the impact on the AONB and Greenbelt. So that's a decision that we have to take whether we feel there's an impact. So I'll put my cards on the table. I think there is going to be an impact on both. I think the next slide, oh, thank you, was the policy BMPG1. My view is if we have policies, we have neighbourhood plans, we go to public consultation, we have to do a lot of work to get to that point, and if we're going to ignore it, why do we do it? So my view is we have a policy and we should be looking at that policy. We've also talked about the increase in traffic movements. I mean, it's quite substantial. And like Councillor Seaborn said, you know, you take your life in your hands when you go down that road, some of those side roads. I'll talk about the highways impacts. It says Highway Authority, no objection. And I think that's page 16, if I remember. It's about halfway down. And it says they don't think there's going to be a material impact to highway safety. Well, in highways, and I do know a little bit about highways in my role in county, when they look at safety issues, they look at accident data, which is for serious or life-changing accidents or fatalities. So if you've got accidents, just car v car and there's a bit of damage, they're not what highways will consider. So although I accept what they say, there's 2 points I would make. Firstly, the highway is a character issue for me, having this increased highway. And that to me also impacts on the intrinsic beauty of the area. So it might not be solely about the safety, and that's about accident data. It's an increase in numbers. I think it's unsuitable, and the character of having that road, I think, is wrong. I don't like the cladding, which I'm sure someone said had been done unlawfully. I think this is an intensification within a rural setting, a very beautiful setting. And if we're not careful, we're going to have an industrial park look. I really am against that as well. I have to admit, and I will clearly listen to what my colleagues say, but I have, at the moment, I'm not minded to support this. So I'll be objecting. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Dinas. Councillor Follows, then followed by Councillor Costa. Councillor Follows.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Good evening, everyone. So yes, I very much sympathise with the comments that have been made so far, particularly the Bramley Neighbourhood Plan. I think that's something we should be taking seriously when we have neighbourhood plans that clearly don't want exactly this sort of thing. So I do take that very seriously. The highways impact has been assessed with a desktop assessment again, and I think most of what we've actually observed or have seen of this site would imply that that highways impact assessment is not quite correct. I have two other points. One is a question, I suppose one is probably a hypothetical question as well, a rhetorical question even. The impact of the green belt that you've got there, the cladding offset by removal of silo and Barnby, does that mean as a principle then we're allowed to, if we're supposed to let something awful happen potentially, as long as they've offset it by removing something that was of greater or equal awfulness on the same plan? Is that a principle to which that we should be following with these sorts of things? Because that's the implication of that comment. And generally, if we don't like a thing, I think we should just say so and not accept it based on the fact that it's been balanced by removing something else that's ugly on the same site. So yeah, that's the rhetorical question. But in terms of my other question was about the rural economy, and this might just because this hasn't come up for me in a planning application before. Is there a specific list of things that we define as the rural economy or of a rural economic nature, as opposed to things that are economical or industrial in the rural area? I mean, is there a distinction that we're making? Because it sounds to me like we can't specify really that there's rural activity going to be going on here in perpetuity. And I suspect what qualifies as a rural economic activity, other than the fact that it's in the countryside, is subjective. And I just want to double check that that is a subjective thing and there's not somewhere in policy that defines what a rural economy is.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I think it is subjective. It is a matter of judgment for the committee as to whether it constitutes, in the words of policy BNPG1, is it specifically relevant to the rural economy? That is a matter for you all to decide. My judgment on page 15 of the report is that it does have some rural relevance, but it is a matter of judgment. And on the green belt, again, it is matter of judgment in terms of openness. You know, does it, looking at the scheme as a whole, would it be detrimental? Would it be neutral? Would it be beneficial? It is a matter of judgment. Yeah.
And I'll just conclude then. I think I'm in the same place as Councillor Dinas and others in terms of, at the moment, I believe there are enough issues here to constitute an objection, and pending other comments. I think the other thing I would just throw in is that even if the roster of things that were presented right now as likely businesses in that new establishment were compatible with what we subjectively agreed with the rural economy, there is quite literally nothing that says it would stay like that forever anyway. And it could, as people have speculated here, move towards other uses or less compatible rural uses or different rural uses based on somebody else's judgment in the fullness of time. So I'm inclined at the moment to stick with the more direct interpretation of the Bramley Neighbourhood Plan, but obviously I will listen to other members. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Follows. Councillor Costa.
Yeah, I won't take too long because a number of the comments I wanted to make have pretty much been in line with what others have had to say. But when it comes right to the heart of this, that the heart of this, as far as I'm concerned, is the impact it's having on the AONB and the green belt in the countryside, effectively. And I just don't think a case has been made for a cladded, what is about to become, I suspect, pretty much a small industrial park of some kind, with a whole variety of uses, all of which are entirely legitimate in business terms, but are not an appropriate replacement, in my view, in an area such as this. So as the planning officer has said to us, and I don't often find myself on different sides to our planning officers, my judgment is a different one. My conclusion is a different one to that which the planners have reached. I'm also, could I just bring in the point that Councillor Seaborn raised and others have sort of alluded to. I do have a concern about the access to the site, if indeed permission were given. And I know how difficult it is with the highways people and so on, and I'm not unsympathetic to them. I think sometimes we misunderstand what their role is and what they can and can't object to. But I would have thought that this is certainly one where we could ask them to take account of the points that Councillor Seaborn has made. I think we all, or most of us, will be pretty familiar with the roads he's talking about, and certainly access from the areas he's spoken about to the southern end of Guildford. So it's just going to be a nightmare, and single track roads to reach these places are not ideal, and there will be an intensification of use. And I just think it will be reasonable to ask them again. Those will be my two main points, and I'll leave the others because others have come.
Thank you, Councillor Costa. We now have three new speakers: Councillor Goodridge, Councillor Reid, and Councillor Darcy. So, Councillor Goodridge, please.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm not going to repeat what other people have said, but I know the roads well, particularly from my part of the borough, which would come from the Bramley direction. And I agree entirely with Councillor Seaborn that having driven those roads, it's something which you take your life in your hands, not for safety, but for the frustration of trying to pass vehicles coming the other way. We've got 520 square meters being applied for. What we don't know, of course, is how many businesses will be there. It won't be one in Barn A and one in Barn B, that's for sure. There are going to be quite a lot. If we've got 16 parking spaces, are there going to be 16 businesses, 8 businesses? Of course, we don't know. And that does make a difference, or could make a difference, on the amount of traffic and the amount of movements and so on that happen. So this, of course, application, so far as I'm aware, but I'm happy to be corrected, does not stipulate how many businesses would be on this site. And I do think it is worth, certainly, as the information I have at the moment, I'm not prepared to support it. And I would support any suggestion that we would go back to the highways and say, are you seriously saying the traffic movements, if they all came, for example, from Bramley, would that be acceptable? Because I don't think it would. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Goodridge. Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good evening, everyone. I must declare that I am on the board of the AONB, and I totally respect Clive Smith. He is a very good and senior ex-planner, but I tend to disagree with some of the things he has said in the report. I also wanted to thank I think it's Haskin Parish Council, for all the coloured pictures that I've received. And I think if you've all looked at them, and I particularly looked at the figure 5 buildings A and B as they stood in 2016 at the bottom of the page, it clearly shows this is a very sloping, narrow little valley. And if you look at the aerial photographs, the whole valley near this development, or proposed development rather, is very, very wooded, as most of Surrey is, but it's quite sheltered by the trees. And I think this might have persuaded Clive Smith to change his opinion, because he does say that it would only be acceptable in his first report, I believe, in AONB terms, supported by the proposed AONB management plan for habitat enhancement discussed at the meeting, involving 400 hectares, 200 acres of which are under the control of the applicant. It all sounds very convoluted, but as AONB members, and with the AONB plans that we have agreed and the management plan that as a council we've agreed, we have to look at the intrinsic beauty and tranquility of the area. And I don't think from what I've heard so far, we're going to have that with lots of traffic movements. Although it is a sheltered little valley, I'll give it that. It's and I know in Hascombe itself, we approved, in fact, AONB, Clive himself approved another dwelling, which was a private dwelling. That too was hidden down from the main highway. But here we don't know, we haven't got enough information to know, you know, how this will continually be developed. So I'm a bit perturbed by it all. And I think that's more or less all that I need to say on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Darcy.
Thank you very much. Most of the things I was going to say have been said by others, so I won't repeat them. The two concerns I have that haven't been addressed as much as I would like are the biodiversity, because there doesn't seem to be an ecology report. There's only that checklist, which is self-filled in, and there's no suggestion of any attempt to make any sort of gain in biodiversity, which again is something that we would expect. And also there's no mention of sustainability in the sense of the materials used and the long-term use of the area, the accessibility. These are all considerations for sustainability. And I would say that a location like that, where you're going to have people coming from a distance for, and we're not sure what for, because it's not been decided yet, but there could be any sort of possible use. How sustainable would that be using the little local roads? So those are my concerns. And I think everything else has been covered. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Darcy. So, Councillor Townsend.
I just wanted to clarify one thing that Councillor Reid just mentioned about the management plan for the AONB. Now, Clive Smith seems to have removed his objection because of the, you know, balancing of the management plan. Not that I think that possibly, I'm not sure I agree with that approach, but he did mention, I think within the report, and I'm going from memory, so please forgive me if I haven't remembered it quite correctly, is that there was, it should be within the section 106 that there was this AONB management plan. And I just wondered whether or not you could clarify whether or not that is something that has been pursued or is being pursued. Because in order for me to weigh up what he has actually said, I just need to know whether or not there is something in the balance there. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the paragraph on page 15 of the pack headed the AONB planning advisor. I mean, that's the brief summary. I suppose in short, we didn't consider a 106 agreement to be proportionate. I was of the view that I am of the view that the development is acceptable on its merits, and therefore requiring it to be linked to much wider sort of things that are going on in that vicinity in the AONB. I didn't think was proportionate. I mean, we probably could section 106 it if we considered it to be proportionate. I think at the time this was discussed over the summer, and the AONB management plan, my understanding was it hadn't yet been agreed. I'm sure Councillor Reid will correct me if I'm wrong. But there was some element of doubt about that, and we decided it. I mean, A, we wouldn't be able to link it to something that wasn't yet in existence effectively, but also B, I think the decisive consideration from my perspective is that I didn't think it would be proportionate to the development proposed. Thank you, Chair.
Can I just clarify, sorry, just one tiny point on that. So therefore, reading the removal of the objection, I think that it implies that removal was based on that taking place. So in which case, if that isn't taking place, that kind of removes his removal of his objection. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a fair summary. In the report, it does sort of link it to that paragraph, and where I'm effectively saying that's what he wanted, and we've decided for those reasons that that would not be appropriate. So yeah, I think you could fairly construe that he's no longer in agreement with the scheme, yes.
I don't see any more speakers, so we have a recommendation, and the recommendation is to grant this with conditions and informatives. So I have to ask you, those in favour of granting this proposal, please show. And those against?
That was none in favour, 10 against.
And any abstentions?
And 1 abstention.
So, councillors, may I now ask you for the grounds for objection, please? Councillor Townsend.
I would say the impact on the AONB definitely be something reason for refusal. Impact, I think, was one of the others was about the green belt within the decision-making things, the intensification of usage in that particular part of the countryside. I mean, I'm loath to include highways, but to be honest, that little narrow road going down there, but that might be covered under the intensification. Yeah, the Bramley neighbourhood plan, and also the lack of net gain on biodiversity. Oh, I have made some notes actually. And the lack of ecology reports. I know you say they're not needed, but we have ecology reports for people doing an extension, you know, that they have to check for bats. So I'm not convinced, you know, I need to understand a bit more about that. And also the sustainability, climate change and sustainability SPD. Can we quote that at this stage? To do with any of the, you know, the buildings, the lack of any kind of energy statement on those buildings at all?
Thank you, Chair. We've made a note of those. There were a couple of areas there where we felt there may not be kind of grounds to refuse. One was the highway comments. We got quite a fairly lengthy response from the County Highway Authority, but there was also some mention about highways in terms of character and intensification. We could look to include that within the AONB reason, but not in terms of highway safety. In terms of biodiversity, we've got quite a long response from the Wildlife Trust, and I know that there weren't those surveys at the start, but their response does justify that position. So I think we would struggle to defend particularly a biodiversity sustainability reason, but in terms of reasons to do with the Bramley neighbourhood plan, green belts and AONB, those are those kind of balanced reasons that we could look to defend. James has actually got some wording along those lines, if that would help.
Thank you, Chair. So for the Bramley neighbourhood plan and the conflict with policy BNPG1, the reason would read: the proposed development is not considered specifically relevant to the rural economy. It would therefore conflict with policy BNPG1 of the Bramley Neighbourhood Plan 2022, which steers commercial development toward existing centres. And then on the AONB, the proposed development would lead to an intensification of the use of the site and a consequent increase in the number of comings and goings, the majority of which, given the nature of the area, would manifest as vehicular traffic. And of course, there'll be some parked cars. I can work that in. This would be harmful to the character and amenity of the Surrey Hills area of outstanding natural beauty, contrary to policy RE3 of the local plan part 1 2018 and the provisions of the NPPF. And on Greenbelt, can I just clarify, it's the openness impact of the cladding we're looking at? Sorry about that. Just to clarify on Greenbelt then, the change of use, we think we can go on, and the encroachment of the countryside that would be involved. We're less sure about the cladding, given some of the wording of the NPPF, but we can certainly go with encroachment of countryside, conflicting with the purposes of the Greenbelt as set out and within the NPPF.
So councillors, on the understanding that you're all following everything that has now been agreed, reasons for objection, could you please show now whether you agree to object? Oh, I beg your pardon. From councillor Townsend, is that seconded? By councillor Denis. So all in favour of objection, please show.
That's 10 in favour.
And any abstentions?
One abstention.
Oh, yes. We're going to have a quick break for 5 minutes, if that's all right with everyone. Okay, we're back to the agenda. Agenda item number 9.1. We're looking at WA 2002-02091, Tyler's Court, Rowland Road in Cranley. And over to you, Dylan. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this application is at Tyler's Court for the change of use of an office building to provide 4 dwellings with associated refuge, cycle storage and parking. The application site is here, outlined in red, located on the eastern side of Rowland Road, set to the north of Cranley High Street. The surrounding areas are predominantly commercial to the south and residential to the north. The site falls within the development area of Cranley and contains 2.5-storey building here, the existing proposed. The lawful use is an office. It's accessed via Rowland Road here to the west. Vehicles currently park adjacent to this access and the existing building on site. Slides later on go into more detail, but the proposed block plan here shows how the relationship between the proposed parking areas and the building and the existing parking area here. These existing bays, which are in use, do fall outside of the application site. So the application site is proposing 4 parking spaces within the red line, which are these 3 here, and a 4th space here. And so here are some application site photos. The photos on screen show the building here and the access road leading up to the building and some the adjacent buildings. So in the top right photo here, you can see the proposed parking area along this boundary here. It is worth noting that concerns have been raised about these parking spaces and access to these buildings. However, through consultation with the Highways Authority and visiting this site, officers are satisfied that the spaces can be achieved and parking can be laid out in a manner to not block access to the existing buildings, and there is sufficient space to provide the vehicle charging points. And that information is to be conditioned and submitted at a later date. Sorry if I just go back one. I know. So there's 2 photographs here. They show the side boundaries of the application site to the north and south. The next set of photos show the access point and areas of existing parking to the adjacent to the site that fall outside of the boundary, application boundary. These photos show the residential area to the east of the application site, so to the rear of the building on Oslo Mews. So the application site's just here and here in this photo, and you can see some ground floor obscure glazed windows here and here, both of which would serve proposed bathrooms and remain as obscure glazed. So we've got the existing elevations here, the northwest, south and east. The existing floor plans, with the building split over the 3 levels. This is the proposed site showing the change of use. So you can see proposed courtyard here to serve unit 1, cycle storage for units 2, 3 and 4, small courtyard to serve unit 2, and the timber-clad bin store to serve units 2, 3 and 4. So the proposed ground plan, you've got unit 1 here, and you can see it's a private courtyard here with the ground floor with the bedroom that looks out. There's a staircase. Unit 1 is split over 2 floors, so it's a staircase up to a 2nd bedroom. Unit 2, wholly contained on the ground floor, bedroom looking out into the small courtyard, and a staircase up to the 1st floor units. So unit 1 continued over here. You've got the the second bedroom with an ensuite. And you've got unit 3, which would comprise 2 bedrooms and a living area, set wholly within the first floor, and then up into the loft space for the last unit 4, a 1-bed flat, and the proposed roof plan. And see what the west elevations, this would be the front elevation of the building. You can see there's the access to the communal bin store here, and to this side would be the communal entrance into the ground floor, first floor, second floor flats, and there'd be a private entrance this side for the ground and first floor unit, and the bin store here. This is the proposed north-facing elevation, side elevation, and would face the gardens of 3 and 4 Victoria Road. The ground floor openings would serve unit 1. The first floor openings would serve the bedroom of unit 2, the second bedroom of unit 1, and the living area of unit 3. Both of these windows would feature obscure glazing, and the proposed living room window would be fully obscure glazed and have outlook to the west. The proposed bedroom window would be partly upglazed to a height of obscure glaze to a height of 1.7 meters from finished floor level to allow some level of outlook to serve the future occupiers while maintaining sufficient privacy for the rear gardens of Victoria Road. And so we've got the east elevation here, the rear elevation of the building, which would face onto Oslo Mews to the east. This area contains 3 residential dwellings. The ground floor windows would serve the bathrooms of units 1 and 2 that we saw in the photos earlier, the existing obscure glazed windows. The first floor windows would serve the bedroom and ensuite of bedroom 2 of unit 1, and one of the bedrooms serving unit 3. These openings would feature areas of obscure glazing, as you can see here, and roof lights serving unit 4 and a dormer. Sorry, south elevation, nearly skipped it. This is another side elevation onto the boundary with the rear of the commercial units. So ground floor level, you've got the bin store here, a small courtyard area the doors open out onto. First floor level, you've got the windows serving unit 3 in the communal staircase, and the dormer, which would also serve the communal staircase, and roof lights that serve unit 4. And so we've briefly covered the planning history of the application site here. It goes back a number of years with several applications. So the current application follows a previously refused scheme, this first one here. It sought permission for 5 units, whereas this one's 4. It was refused by planning committee in January 2022 for the reasons shown on the slide. Primarily insufficient parking, cramped and contrived internal layout, which resulted in an overdevelopment of the site and poor living conditions. In addition, there was an earlier application in 2020, which was also refused for the change of use for 5 dwellings. Prior to this, the application site did benefit from permission for a change of use for 4 residential dwellings, the same as what is being proposed today. However, that has since lapsed. Notwithstanding this, officers are of the view that the change of use from office to residential would be acceptable, given its location, given the location of the site and the inadequate quality and flexibility of the existing use as office space, as has been previously determined in older applications. The officer's vacancy in the fact that permitted development rights to seek the change of use to residential do remain intact. And so comparisons with the previously refused proposals here, the most recently refused scheme is here. So it was for 5 residential dwellings rather than 4. So the number of parking spaces now accords with the council's standards, with that reduction in the number of units being proposed. and cycle storage is being provided on site, and all of the units do meet the technical space standards. So you've got comparisons with the elevations here. You can see that there are now no external balconies proposed to serve the units that were previously here. So they've been removed to minimize impact in terms of neighboring privacy. Officers have carefully considered the acceptability of the internal layout, particularly the impact on neighboring residential amenity and outlook for future occupiers. So it's balancing the need for outlook from the habitable space with the existing privacy of the residents on Oslo Mews and Victoria Road. Some rooms would feature obscure glazed windows, but some outlook is being provided where possible. And officers are of the view and take a balanced approach that the standard of accommodation would be acceptable while maintaining neighbouring residential amenity. The key matters for consideration are the loss of office space, impact on residential amenity, and the parking and access. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Townsend.
Thank you. This is a really difficult one, this one. It's been obviously before us several times. I mean, I do despair slightly at, not even slightly, I do despair at the design. And whilst I appreciate and do welcome the reduction to the 4 flats from the 5, I just have to, you know, I still have concerns about the amenity space for residents, the amenity available there, and how people living there will be. I mean, you looked at the elevations there and you saw their French doors opening. They're just opening up onto tarmac and their cars. I mean, if you could you bring back the pictures up, the photographs of the area, because this area is fronts onto, yeah, that one there. As you can see in that bottom 4th hand one there, at the bottom number 4, you've got the green doors there which go into the Oxfam shop, which have a lot of people going in and out with stuff. They park just in front of there. I do it to myself. And you go run in, drop your bags off, and they have those big wheelie bins there, the big, you know, that are picked up. And what we're saying is you're introducing a residential element in here into what is quite a commercial area where the bin stores are going to be. The bin stores right next to what is being called a courtyard, but it's a tiny bit of space. And in the summer months, that's going to be a big bin in there, or big bins, and it's just not going to be pleasant. You know, I'm been thinking about this all day, you know, just like, what are we providing there? Are we providing just, you know, I know people can, the transfer before was under permitted development rights, and, you know, we have very little say about things, but now we have got a say about the design and whether or not this creates a nice area for people to live. I mean, most people can't even, well, they can't put out their washing anywhere. There's nowhere, if you've got a child, there's nowhere to play. And it's quite, you know, cars will be coming up and turning right in front of those French doors because there's nowhere else to turn. You literally could step outside of your front door and have a car turning there right in front of you, because that is the widest point. I mean, with all the best will in the world, I just find it very difficult to imagine creating a place that is nice and good for somewhere to live here. And, you know, with the electrical vehicle charging points, I know we said, you know, that parking may be achieved, but we've now sort of kicked the can down the road on the EV charging points, because before we had them positioned and we said, well, you can't position them there because people are coming out of, you know, other places, offices and things, they're going to trip over them. So I really do not know how those charging points are going to be achieved. I know I made comment earlier about the condition 7 and the wording, and hopefully that might have been jigged around a little bit because it was a little bit obscure, to do with the obscure glazing. But again, I just feel that, I mean, I will listen to what other members say, but at this moment in time, I really feel quite strongly that we aren't concentrating on building somewhere here that is a good place for people to come and live.
Thank you, councillor Townsend. Are there any others? Councillor Costa.
I just think I feel I need to lean a bit the other way in terms of what Councillor Townsend said. I mean, I guess we all have some view, some vision, which might change from time to time in our minds about what is and isn't acceptable accommodation and what, you know, will and won't do. But I think in planning terms, you know, we have to be guided by the advice and the information we're given. And what I seem to recall reading in the report is that the accommodation does meet national standards. We have had explanation as to how the charging points could be met and so on. And much as, yeah, it might not be somewhere I would choose to live, it might not be somewhere other people would choose to live, but if accommodation is being built and given the overriding need for provision of accommodation, I'm not quite sure legitimately on what grounds at this stage we should oppose it. I'm very aware that the previous proposal for 4 is now not material in the sense that it has lapsed. But nonetheless, bearing in mind what we have in this report, I don't think I can be persuaded to vote against the officer recommendation unless somebody can convince me that substantially on appropriate and specific planning grounds, it should be turned down.
Thank you, councillor Costa. Councillor Ellis.
Thank you, Chairman. I completely agree and support the very important points that my colleague and fellow ward councillor Liz Townsend highlighted so eloquently. And goodness me, I'm sorry, I find this a truly unacceptable prospect in which I would not wish people to have to live. I won't sort of go through everything she said again, but I would like to add that the officers have mentioned several times in the report the words "on balance." And whilst I do understand that on occasions this can be a valid reason to permit an application, but I don't think in this case and with this application that's appropriate. There are simply too many issues that at this time and at this stage of the debate that I find unacceptable, beg your pardon. I'm hoping that those members of the committee who actually came on the site visit back in the summer will remember just how cramped and overdeveloped the site is with what will become a mixture of residential and business units. And actually, I really think I have to admire the photography talents of the person who took these photographs, because they actually look better than the situation is. And I've lived in Cranley for over 50 years now, and I know the area quite well. Parking is a major problem, and within the wider area, there's absolutely no on-the-street parking. Victoria Road, the people have to have parking permits. Actually, the access and egress from the site is a very narrow part in Rowland Road, where you have lots of school children and buses, etc. Several of the high street outlets, as my colleague mentioned, have legitimate delivery rights and access through the site. And I really can't imagine how the large vehicles that are necessary to empty those bins can actually manage to get anywhere close to them. They certainly, to my mind, won't be able to reverse and turn in that turning area and leave the site in a forward gear. I accept that the building is already there, but as mentioned, it very closely overlooks a community of residential properties that, due to the current business use, can have some privacy and peace in the evenings and at the weekends, but this could change. And really, I do fear that the amenity value of their rear gardens will be lost to them, and as will the rights to the residents' rights to privacy and not to be overlooked. They will be compromised by the proposals. So I totally support my colleagues' views. At this time, I object to the application and cannot accept the proposals before us, but I welcome observations from my other colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis. I have 4 other speakers: Councillor Goodridge, Councillor Reid, Councillor Hegan and Councillor Denis. So Councillor Goodridge, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I have to say in broad terms, I agree with Councillor Cossa in that we've got to come up with planning reasons, and I think they're going to be very rather thin to be able to refuse this. It would have been helpful, I don't know whether it's just my agenda, but I've got no plans, nothing, not even a site plan on our papers, and certainly not elevations past or present, but it's clearly we've seen them up on the screen now. But we agreed in principle, or the council agreed in principle, for the change of use from office to residential back in 2019. And then, of course, the applicant got greedy and tried to put in 5. And I remember very well the site visit. And we came up with good planning reasons why 5 didn't fit, particularly on parking. Looking at the photograph bottom right, I think now there will not be parking in front of that building, which there was before. Which I could understand from the amenities of that building, and I can't remember what it's called now, of that building, it would have been not good at all. And I appreciate that some of the commercial users or the charity users do have these large bins, but of course they haven't got the right to put them blocking other properties anyway. So I am hard pressed. We talked last time about Juliet balconies and so on. I think on the plan there was a Juliet type balcony, but it's one you can't walk out onto. So it's just a feature of railing. So we don't have any problems there. And I do think, you know, when one's talking about the residential amenities of neighbours, that this application is not a problem, and therefore I'm very hard pressed to come up with any reasons why this should not be approved and go with the officer's recommendations. Some people buying a property don't want gardens, don't want to have to cut a little bit of grass, and they're quite happy with tubs and pots, which I suspect is what the owners of these flats would be limited to. So I'll hear whatever people have to say, but I'm certainly at this stage minded to go with the officer's recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Goodridge. Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of questions following on from Councillor Goodridge. We don't know, and I think we would like to know, if there are platforms outside the Juliet balcony windows. That's important to know. And there was a concern that the fire escape, that's important. I feel that we need to think about that, might be compromised by parking. It's very good to see that the size has been reduced to now 4 units rather than 5, but there'll still be well over, or there could be still well over 8 persons being accommodated there, hopefully no children. Obviously, we can't make decisions about civil matters of who parks where and why and what. And that will obviously be up to the new residents. It is a very sad situation. I agree with my former speakers. But I suppose sometimes you need to have accommodation for couples and single people. But it's very congested. It's the bank buildings. Lloyd's Bank opposite has been made into so many flats, no parking at all. It's very congested for the neighbours in Victoria Road. We've got the development behind Mans coming along. You know, it's going to be very, very congested, I believe. I can't think of any other reasons for refusal, but I'm not very happy with it. I agree with you both, Councillor Townsend and Councillor Ellis on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hegan.
I didn't have the benefit of going on a site visit, and so I'd be grateful if you could bring up the pictures again so I can clarify a couple of things in my mind. The green door, I mean, is there a public right of way that allows people to literally drive past the front door of these properties that will have nothing equivalent to a pavement, and there's nothing to enforce private access? Is that correct interpretation rather than custom and practice?
Thank you. No, we don't know what the private arrangements are. It's really, that is a civil matter between owners of different bands. So sorry, I know that's yeah.
And I think one of my esteemed colleagues behind me thought that there is no longer going to be parking alongside the building that's partly white and then partly brick with the blue doors, but I believe that is where the parking is going to be. And so I am concerned that we've got potentially, if we've moved those parking spaces over so that the people can use those doorways, is there really room for emergency services and the sort of bin clearance access that's needed? So while thinking through that, I mean, my main concern with this application is that I don't think it's going to be a pleasant place to live. There's an awful lot of obscured glass, far more than you would normally expect. And I think there is a safety issue, there's an amenity issue, but that's never going to change with a tweaking of the plans. And so unless the amenity of residents, current, potentially and future, is going to be a sufficient reason to refuse, then I think we're tantamount to saying we'll never approve any sort of residential use in that area. And I'm not sure that's a proposition we could support. So I'm feeling very conflicted.
Thank you, Chair. Just one point of clarification, which just to make, because there's been a number of comments about you know, cramped, contrived arrangements and the kind of living conditions of the future occupants. When you're weighing this up, just to make you aware, we are looking at this in a tilted balance. That's okay. Just to make you aware that when you are weighing this up, you do need to be doing it in a tilted balance. So obviously at the moment, we are able to demonstrate 4.9 years of housing supply, which means that that's below the 5-year requirement. So it does become a factor that you're going to have to, when not, I'm not saying that these issues aren't, if you did find that that it was to be refused, not saying these issues aren't ones that you couldn't come to a view that would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the harm, but you would have to do it in that tilted balance. So just a reminder on that point. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Denis.
Thank you. I've got three points, and the first one goes back to the fire exit. So that's page 35, Cranley Parish Council, and it says parking, their views, parking spaces are located in front of fire exits, which is unacceptable. So I want absolute clarity. Are the parking spaces by the fire exits? Because we cannot approve that, because that would be, we would be supporting breaches of fire regulations and everything else. That's my first point. That can be clarified. Second point was page 42, and it could be just a poor choice of words. And it's the last line, highways, good old highways. It says proposal would be unlikely. The use of the word unlikely means, well, it could also be likely. Now, it just could be the poor choice of word, but that didn't really fill me with much hope. It either does or it doesn't. So that was just a point there. And page 40. So at the top, so it's into like the third paragraph, when it talks about neighbouring amenity was raised, therefore it's considered unreasonable to raise any concern in relation to the current application. Well, I'd make a couple of points on that. Firstly, we can have different members, so they're absolutely right to raise any concerns. We have a different plan and we have different circumstances, so it would not be unreasonable if we felt it was impacting on the neighbourhood amenity. I'm sure it wasn't meant to sort of restrict us, but we have that right, and we can change our mind, as we always do in planning. So if we did want to object on that, I think we would be totally fine to do that, and it wouldn't be unreasonable. But if I could have especially an answer on that first one with the fire exits. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so the location of the fire exit is here, which is in line with this parking space, the way it's shown. If I go back to the photos here, so there is a small buffer, a small path here that the cars park on the road here, and there is a gap between the fire exit and where the car would be parked to what we consider sufficiently allow people to exit through this door.
Okay, Jeff, I could just come back on that. That probably gives me more fear than anything else. Firstly, we've got all the EV and all the charging points that we're going to have, but because it's quite a narrow road, people will park up onto that pavement bit, so they will park right against it. So what would happen then if you've got somebody in a wheelchair or a pushchair or whatever trying to get out? If there's a fire, you could have a car, unless you're going to put bollards to prevent people parking onto that pavement. I think having parking spaces right, but I wondered what Surrey Fire and Rescue would think of that, having parking spaces right up, potentially right up against the door, because people will do that because they don't want their wing mirrors to be clipped. I just think that's a real danger, and I think that alone, I couldn't support this just on that alone. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Just one point that, in terms of explaining our reasoning for not objecting on those grounds, is that the office itself obviously is not currently in use at the time that these photographs are taken, but that does carry a parking demand to it, which is often considered to be greater than a parking demand for a residential use. And in terms of that parking that we're suggesting could take place along that side there, that may take place within an office use as well. So that's the kind of rationale for our position on it.
Sorry, Councillor Demas, had you finished?
The difference is obviously the office isn't during the night time, and people will park their cars during the night and park them tight. And that's if we've got a fire and you haven't got the visibility and everything else. I just think that's a very flawed and dangerous assumption to take personally.
Can I just add to that point, if you don't mind as well, Chair? Thank you. Is that the parking at the moment arrangements there? I mean, you can see they put bollards along there so there's no one parked there for the photographs to take place. Normally, it is chaotic down there and there are cars parked all along there, but those cars are parking there without consent. They are parking there because people just parking anywhere. If we create parking spaces, we are giving consent to those parking spaces and saying that we feel that the design of that parking, which is part of our planning things, is correct. So I'm afraid, you know, Councillor Dean is bringing that point forward. It is extremely pertinent, and whilst I appreciate cars are parking there at the moment, we have not as a council given consent to that, whereas we would be now. Thank you.
I wanted to ask a question, actually. I mean, clearly, I assume, and the Councillor Dean has referred to earlier, Highways will have had a look at all these proposals. I seem to recall, and I'm quite happy to be told I'm wrong about this, a process in which the Highways people would consult their own colleagues, including fire and safety, about matters of this kind. I mean, is that not normally done? I mean, they always come back and talk about safety considerations. Well, there's something in here somewhere that talks about safety. I'm not trying to, you know, undermine the point that Kevin Denis is making, but I would hate to find that we turn the application down on those grounds, and I think Councillor Denis has got a fair point there, only to find that the matter had been considered and there was a proper response to it. That would be pretty uncomfortable, I think.
Councillor Denis.
If I can come back, and in my previous life, I've had obviously dealings with Surrey Fire and Rescue as I was the portfolio lead. As far as I'm aware, they're not consulted on all the planning applications, as simple as that. And of course, highways deal with highway safety. So when they're looking, so they'll be looking at going out onto the roads and visibility and stuff like that. They will not be looking at, well, here is a parking space and, oh, is there any fire exits? So, that, you know, I can't say they haven't considered that, but I would be absolutely shocked if they've started to look that wide. They will look at visibility, safety, collision data, that sort of stuff, not about where are your fire exits and how safe is it for people to get out during the middle of the night.
If I could just clarify a little bit what I was trying to say. My understanding was that there were guidelines and criteria that Fire and Rescue did provide for the highways planning function, which would enable them to take account of any difficulties about access, particularly in more urban settings, for access for emergency vehicles. But you know, I don't want to pursue it any further than that, Kevin.
Councillor Sadler.
I just with concerning this road, is it an adopted road? Do highways maintain it, or is it privately owned?
Thank you, Chair. It doesn't. I mean, we don't have a plan that shows whether it's adopted or not. But if you show the location plan, this is a kind of a road that's only serving that building and with. So I would be surprised if it is that section of the red line is an adopted highway. We can check the ownership certificate as well, because if it was part of the highway, it would be they would have served notice. But I don't think that once you're in the site, that's part of the highway.
Councillor Reid.
Yeah, my initial suggestion of looking at fire escapes was followed up by you. Thank you. This building I've been following quite closely because I too live in Cranley. It's not my ward, but I know an awful lot about it. I'm a life member of the History Society, and we have a lot of these courts and, you know, people who owned the older buildings. The roadway was connected to their premises for something, and I believe that this is a private court. It was Tyler's Court originally, I believe. Now, the other thing I failed to mention is that having looked at this over the months since the summer, I've noticed that there's been a lot of building work there, and it seems as if a lot of this has already been built. I don't know whether that has any bearing on what we decide this evening. I don't know whether it will. It won't be taken into consideration, I don't think. But you know, it seems to be a very dangerous situation, as Councillor Dean has pointed out, with so many people accessing the actual new development, so many people accessing cars that are parked, refuse, the backs of the buildings, which are originally the ones along the bottom of the site, where Oxfam is, all those buildings originally Elizabethan. So, you know, they are in the conservation area too, I believe, aren't they, Patricia? They're in the conservation area, yes. So it's going to be a very busy place. I don't know what else to say really, but I suppose on technical, pure planning grounds, we can't really object anymore.
Thank you, Councillor Gale.
Thank you, Chair. It's a very difficult one that we've looked at many times, and they're trying to tweak it here and there to try and make it viable. I think the developer is. But I think we can see that it's really not an appropriate development, because it's now virtually wrapped in obscure glazing because of the overlooking issues in all sorts of directions. There really is no amenity space, although yes, some people don't want a garden, but you should have somewhere to breathe. The parking is an issue, the bin collecting is an issue, the fire escape is an issue. And then we're told, well, let's remember the tilted balance. Well, really and truly, do we just have to approve something that's really inappropriate just because of the tilted balance these days? It seems it just keeps going on and on, this one. I can't see what we can object to under planning grounds, but it really isn't a very good development in my view.
Thank you, Councillor Hegan.
I just wanted to come back to the question about fire exit safety. The fire exit we're concerned about isn't in the building we're being asked to approve. It's in a neighbouring building. And so I was following through the line of thinking that we're effectively creating a new, by giving permission, we're consenting to something that's a nuisance. And that if the owners of the building on the corner with that fire escape tried to produce their own fire safety plan, we'd have prevented them doing so. I do really think that there might be grounds to get specialist opinion as to whether we're putting ourselves at risk as a council by approving something that could foreseeably give rise to issues further down the line. I don't know if there's any guidance from our officers on that, but it's causing me some concerns. And I think the fact that we didn't identify this as a possible cause concern when we were just counting spaces previously shouldn't prevent us from having legitimate concerns now.
Thank you. Can I just really quickly clarify with the tilted balance? We're not saying that you wouldn't be able to refuse because of the tilted balance. It's just that in doing so, you'd have to come to the view that the harms significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. Thank you.
Councillor Reid.
Could we not say that we could put a proposal to us all, a proposal could be put to us all that we would agree, subject to approval by fire safety or something like that?
Thank you, Chair. If the proposal was that you were satisfied with it subject to your fire safety issue, then I would suggest it might be reasonable to defer to seek further details in relation to that. But that would be over to yourselves. I'd suggest only deferring if once that issue has been resolved, you would be minded to find the application acceptable, because otherwise you'd be deferring to bring it back to then refuse. So, but I will leave that to yourselves. Thank you.
You need to test the feeling of the meeting on this.
Thank you, Councillor Cost. Councillor Goodrich.
Yes, I wouldn't object to that, but and when we do defer it, I suppose the question can be asked of the developer as to whether, if there is a problem in that regard, they could include or amend the plans to put some bollards on the boundary of the existing pavement so that you can't park on that bit of land.
They're allowed to.
Thank you. So is there, Councillor Cost, your microphone's on. Is there a seconder for the deferral? There is. Who, and it was Councillor Reid who proposed it and Councillor Dinas who seconded it. Oh, I beg your pardon. Well, no, okay. Okay, so there is a proposer and a seconder though. And Councillor Hegan, did you want to say more?
Yes, I just think that we need to follow through the officer's advice that before we vote on the deferral, we actually are sure that we have sufficient support to approve the application if we do get a satisfactory report, because I do take the point that we can't bring it back and then refuse it on other grounds. I think we should vote on that first.
Can I just say, Chairman, I certainly part of my proposal, I didn't state it explicitly, was for clarification and investigation and subsequent clarification for us of all issues pertaining to fire safety and our position in relation to it. If that helps, you know.
That is your proposal. Councillor Dinas, are you happy to second that? You are, thank you.
Just before members vote, I think it would be useful if they could articulate in as much detail as possible their reasons for recommending the deferral. I appreciate that the fire safety issue is relevant to that, but if, for instance, there were other factors that members had an issue with, which may have led them to refuse permission, then I think it's worthwhile raising now so that those matters may be potentially addressed during the intervening period. As I say, I'm not sure it would be appropriate to defer the matter and then simply have it come back after they've potentially resolved those issues and it be refused for reasons that members may have made their minds up tonight on.
I appreciate what you're saying, but can I just clarify my own proposal is because I only have concerns around that issue. Clearly, if there are members here who feel that there are other things that they're dissatisfied with, they won't vote in favour of deferral on those grounds and another proposal would have to come forward. That's the way I would see it anyway, but I do take your point.
No, I completely agree, Councillor, but it may be useful for other members to inform their decision to vote.
Thank you, Councillor Gale.
Yeah, sorry, can I just ask a question? If this goes along and fire and rescue say, no, you can't block that fire escape there, and the developer comes back and says, okay, well, we'll take away that one parking space because that would unblock it. Is it then left with not enough parking spaces for the actual development to continue? Because the fire and rescue might just say, you can't have it. That's my question.
It may well, but we're asking our officers, we've got deferring so our officers can look at that, speak to the fire officer, and then we'll come back. Sorry.
Thank you. So we have Councillor Townsend, you want to speak?
Sorry, I was just going to, I appreciate we're going to vote on the motion to defer. I just want to come back on what Lewis said, because I think that even if people decide to defer, for me, there is still a very difficult case about the amenity on this site, whether or not it's over obscure glassing, which I know is protecting other people's amenity, but also I don't know whether members appreciate, but literally where the property ends, there are French doors which are opening out onto the area where people are turning because that is the widest area. You can't back into this site. You have to drive into the site, and you have to turn literally where that office door is there. I mean, there's a car park there, but that is where you do your manoeuvre. And there will be French doors opening out to, you could open your French door and hit a car. I mean, literally, it is so tight there. And that's where you have to turn, because that is the widest part of the site. And for me, there is a problem with there being no delineation between what is an area of private space to the flats almost, and where people turn. Because if you had, say you've got a 1-bedroom flat, fine, but if you had somebody visiting with a child, French doors open, literally they could just run out into the cars turning, because there's no wall, there's not even a little wall, like a little half wall to stop people coming in and out. So for me, there is an issue there, because people will still go in and drop off, whether we like it or not, their stuff to the Oxfam, they will. And obviously people going in and out from the Oxfam. So I really think that particular point for me is something which I just find very difficult to understand, how we can approve French doors going out onto an area we're also saying is a turning circle. Sorry, but that is something. Thank you.
Can I just repeat again, Chairman? I think we have a motion which has been seconded. If Councillor Townsend or others have other reasons that they feel they would wish to object on and they wish to have further explored, then I think the only proper thing for them to do is vote against the motion, which seeks only clarification on that one point, and then they can put their own proposal forward. But I certainly would not want to add that into my proposal. But we do have it. Perhaps we could just test the feeling of the meeting.
Thank you very much, Councillor Cossett. So we have a proposal and it's been seconded. And would you I guess you don't need it repeated. So we'll do as Councillor Cossett suggested. We will now take a vote on that seconded proposal.
It's 5 in favour.
And those against?
4.
Thank you. So we have voted to defer. Oh, any abstentions? Yeah.
I'm abstaining because I don't accept the premise that either you're for it and therefore you vote for defer, or you're against it and you can't vote for defer. That's not an acceptable choice.
Yep, it's carried. Thank you very much. So we voted to defer on those reasons. Thank you. So now we come to.
Sorry, Chair. Can I just add though? But you know, if we are, like Lewis said to us, if we defer, we're just deferring on those grounds, and we're implying that the rest of it's okay. And which is why I brought it up, because in case it got agreed, that I am not consenting to the rest of it's okay. I just wanted that pointed out.
No, Councillor Ellis.
I would like to second that. Thank you.
Thank you. We move on. We move on to the next application, which is Kate. So just swap. Happy Christmas, Councillor Goodridge. This is WA 2022-01919, land south of the High Street in Cranley. Kate, when you're ready.
Thank you very much, Chair. And this application is for reserved matters consent for 39 dwellings as part of the Barclays development within Cranley. Prior to me going into my presentation, I'd just like to talk you through the update sheet which was produced regarding the application. And I've also got one verbal update to add to that, which I can share with you, Chair, in writing after the meeting. So just quickly to go through the update sheet, excuse me, in the description of the development, I refer to, which is in the proposal section of the report, I refer to condition 22 and the discharge of that condition being part of the current proposal, but that's now been removed as it's to take place in a later stage of the development. In addition, I refer to 9 2-bedroom and 23 bedroom units being proposed within the mix of the 39 units. Excuse me, that should actually be 10 2-bedroom and 19 3-bedroom. And I've also provided within the update sheet. Excuse me, I've also provided within the update sheet an update to a table which is included within the report, which shows the mix of the units provided. I've proposed some amendments to the conditions as recommended in the original report. So there's a slight change to some of the plan numbers, which is in condition number 1, and a new recommended wording for condition 8. This condition is to require, excuse me, I haven't been talking all evening, so now I'm afraid my old cough is coming back to me. This condition requires the provision of an upgrade to an existing link through to the Waverley car park in Cranley, the Stockland Square car park. And the proposed wording I've given in the update sheet just changes that slightly so it will better fit in with the timescales which Surrey have for doing other works to the Downs link. And the verbal update, which I have following on from that update, is a further change to a recommended condition, which is recommended condition 5. I propose changing the wording there to effectively allow the development, this part of the development phase 4 to be occupied prior to the new emergency access link and footpath being provided, given that there will be still be construction works going on at that point in time. So that's the update sheet, and with that said, I will move now to the presentation. So here we can see a location plan. The road to the north of the site is the Cranley High Street. The road to the left-hand side of the screen there is Allfold Road, which is where the houses proposed within this phase of the development would be accessed from. And Knoll Lane runs to the right-hand side of the screen there. I'm sure most of you will know the development in Cranley. The Knoll Lane end of the development, the first phase of the overall 425 units which were given outline consent, the properties there are accessed from Knoll Lane, but it will only be those properties in phase 1 that are accessed from that end. So the current application site, as you can see in the middle there in red, will be accessed from Allfold Road, which is to the left-hand side of the screen there. And this is the 4th and final phase of the overall 425 unit scheme. And Knoll Park, which I understand is substantially complete and close to opening, is to the south of the site. So that's the open space you can see there on the plan. Looking now at some site photos, so Barclays are on site, building out earlier phases of the scheme currently, and this section of the site has throughout most of the development phase been used as a construction compound for works that are taking place in other parts of the site. So there's some photos here of that use continuing. So the image you can see there to the left is looking towards the Downs link, and you can just see it's the white building there is some of the properties that are on the high street there, but the majority of this site borders onto the Stockland Square car park. The middle image shows looking excuse me, towards the east, towards the phase 1 of the wider Barclays scheme, which has been complete for a number of years now and is occupied. And then the final image there to the right is looking to the south towards Knoll Park. So the tree line you can see there is the boundary between the application site and Knoll Park. And looking now, the image there to the left-hand side is looking across from the the construction compound area towards the phase 3, which is currently under construction. So you can just see on the horizon there are some buildings which are coming out of the ground, which is the start of the phase 3 of construction. And the two images, the centre and right hand images there are of the properties which have been built out and I understand occupied within phase 2 of the scheme, just to give you an idea of the character that's become established within phase 2. And so now moving to the proposed plans, here's the proposed site plan. As you can see, there's a sort of central access road area over the majority of site, with an area of housing also to the south of that. The properties to the south would be, excuse me, accessed via on foot to the front, but with a parking area to the rear. No leap or lap would be provided within this phase of the development. However, there is an existing large open play area within both phase 1 and phase 3 adjacent to this part of the development. You can also see on the top of the plan there, if you can just see the red triangle on the site boundary there, that shows the applicant has indicated that they would be looking to provide an upgrade to the existing link through from the Downs link to Stockland Square car park. And we have here a tenure plan which shows in blue the private units and in purple the shared ownership units, which would be to the south of the site there adjacent to Knoll Park. The scheme overall would provide 30% of units as affordable, and they're spread throughout the different phases of the development. And here now I have, there are obviously 39 dwellings proposed, so I haven't provided the elevations for all of them, but here's just a selection of the elevations to give you an idea of the character of the buildings which are proposed, which would be in a traditional style with the Surrey vernacular. And some further house elevations there. And just to confirm the key matters for consideration, firstly, the provision of affordable housing. The scheme would provide for the final affordable units to be delivered from the overall outline consent. The design and impact on visual amenity, the proposed scheme is considered to have an appropriate visual impact, which would be in line with the aesthetic which is established through earlier phases of the scheme. In terms of impact on residential amenity, the properties proposed in this phase would be well distanced from adjacent residential properties, both within excuse me, phase 1 and the properties that are the residential properties which are above several premises on the high street. In addition, all of the units proposed would have a suitable level of amenity, so they would all meet the nationally described space standards and have external amenity space. With regards to car parking, there would be a sufficient level of parking as well as the provision of visitor spaces. There are a number of recommended highways conditions which would ensure that vehicles other than emergency vehicles wouldn't be able to access this part of the site from Knoll Lane, preventing having an unsuitable level of traffic on that lane. In terms of flood risk and drainage, the proposal is acceptable and has been reviewed by the local lead flood authority. In terms of sustainability considerations, as you're all aware, we have a new SPD, so applications which are being validated going forward are required to meet all of the details in that SPD and provide us with that detail. However, with this application, because it was validated some time ago, they have not been required, and as a transitional arrangement, we haven't insisted that they provide us with all of those details which we'll be getting going forwards. But notwithstanding that, we consider that the application is acceptable on sustainability grounds, and conditions are recommended for electric vehicle charging points and for limiting water use. And in terms of impact on biodiversity and trees, again, the proposal is considered to be acceptable. And that's everything, Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, councillors. Councillor Townsend.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, this obviously is a long-standing application, and this is the last phase. There's just a couple of points I just want to confirm with Kate, and I very much welcome the condition 9, which obviously hopefully will ensure that pedestrian links will be available to public as opposed to this becoming a private community. I just am a little bit concerned about the wording of it. I just wonder whether or not we should be saying all pedestrian links into and out of the site from the Downs link shall be open to members of the public at all times, because otherwise, if people are in the parkland, they could come through, in which case they're coming out of the site and not just into the site, if you know what I mean. So whether or not we should just tighten that up a tiny bit to make sure that people can walk through from the parkland and we have that permeability, which was obviously one of the big things about this site, was to create that permeability from the parkland into the high street there. And also just from a point of interest, I do think when the last phase came through, from memory, that Berkeley Homes said that all the heating was going to be electricity and they weren't using any further gas boilers. And I just wondered, Kate, just from a point of interest, whether or not you'd heard him mention about that on this particular phase of the site. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Townsend. With regards to the wording of condition 9, I think it should be fine to add those points in. Obviously, the permeability through to the Knoll Park site won't necessarily be entirely within the applicant's gift, because it will obviously be a shared boundary. But I can certainly add in that wording just for clarity to condition 9. With regards to the buildings and their heating, I'm afraid I haven't been able to find that information, so I don't have that detail at this stage, unfortunately.
Couple of very quick points. I'm not sure anybody here received a supplementary document. I certainly didn't, and a few others haven't got it either, but that's a minor point. Yeah, well, I haven't had access to email, so it would have been nice if there was some copies here as well, but minor point. I just wondered what the plot numbers were for the shared ownership. I don't know if I've tried to look at the document and I just can't see, because I'm then looking at the sizes, and although most of them meet, some of them are by a fraction, and I would just be disappointed if all those at the smallest possible size were the ones that were, yeah. So I just wondered what the plot numbers, if I can't see it on the diagram. Yeah, no, what their numbers are, so I could match them against the figures.
Yes, apologies, I don't have that those figures immediately in front of me, so we're going to just see if we can find those while the debate continues. Thank you.
Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's an improvement. I remember a long time ago when this was first mooted, that the top part of this particular development here was criticised by the police because it was just a big car parking area, which I think the developer now has taken into account, because with it as an open car park, they could see that there could be potential problems with unsocial behaviour, antisocial behaviour. So that's an improvement. But I too would like some more details about the shared ownership in pink or red or whatever it is at the bottom. Thank you.
Councillor Townsend and then Councillor Darcy.
I only want to make a very small point. Within the final document that we issue, can we make sure the Stockland Square is spelt correctly? It's Stocklund, not land. Thank you.
Councillor Darcy, then Councillor Hegan.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a few points about sustainability. I appreciate that the SPD hadn't come into effect, but nevertheless, in the MPPF, there's requirements, expectations for the type of measures that should be introduced. And it's disappointing not to have any information about it. I think that's the consistent point that I've tried to make throughout these 3.5 years that I've been doing this, is that we need this information. So what I'm asking for is that they provide information about what sort of heating and so on they're going to be doing. So we know that when we approve things, what we're getting. But as it is, we don't know. These houses might all have gas boilers. They might have the absolute minimum of insulation. Given the circumstances that we're living in now with this huge increase in the cost of energy, it would seem to be negligent for a building company to put up buildings that weren't as energy efficient as possible. And I just would like us to be able to hold them to that. And we can't. We can't because we don't have any information about it. So I don't think that's acceptable. And I'm fed up with it. I'm fed up. I have to keep mentioning it every single time. Hopefully, once we introduce our checklist, which I have seen, and which I think was approved by, certainly by the services ONS, we'll at least have some information. But as it stands, I don't like being told that because this is a reserved matter and because the outline was approved 1,000 years ago, then we apply the standards of whatever, Saxon times. We don't live in Saxon times anymore. We live in 2022 and we have real problems with energy and we have climate change. So we need to do something about it. So please, can we take this seriously? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Darcy, spoken from the heart. So Councillor Hegan, then Councillor Cossett. Hegan.
I just wanted to pick up on the fact that we have no one-bedroom properties in here. And I'd noted the absence of one-bed properties on earlier phases, expecting that this phase would see that sort of rationalised to something closer to the outline mix. And, you know, it's virtually halved from what the outline suggested. And I'm just very disappointed about that. I'm not sure that I'm suggesting any change, but I'd like to register it because I think we've been shortchanged in terms of the housing mix.
Councillor Cossett.
Yeah, just picking up what Councillor Darcy said, it's a genuine question for my own edification and so on. I'm just not sure, and I suppose I've never been sure, and I should have thought about it before really, about how far some of the things that Councillor Darcy is asking should be in the application and should come before us are matters for planning, and how far, for example, in relation to things like insulation and so on, they are matters that are dealt with as part of the building regulations. And I think it's important that the committee understands, because if there is a deficiency, I'll support Councillor Darcy 100% in terms of planning. But I certainly know from some of the work I had done on my house, some of the things that I thought he was referring to are things that have been picked up by the building inspectors as part of building regulations. So if we could have some clarification on that, I'd be great.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Cossett. And I think the short answer is if it's within the SPD document, then it is a relevant planning consideration. And you're correct, certainly, that there is an overlap between planning matters and building control. And the building control does seek a relatively high level of sustainability, but there are certain things within the SPD which goes beyond that. And certainly, applications going forward, including reserved matters application, will be required to provide us with that detail, and we will be able to assess it against the SPD. Thank you. And to come back, Councillor Dinas, thank you on your query. So the plots that are the shared ownership units are 390 to 396. And from the accommodation schedule, the 2 beds would have excuse me, floor areas of 79 metres squared and the 3 beds of 93 metres squared. And they are in line with the nationally described standards, space standards, and we don't have any powers to insist on them being higher than the space standards. I would say in terms of the number of bed spaces to be provided within those shared ownership units, they're of a form which our housing enabling team do support. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. We have Councillor Follows and Councillor Dinas and Councillor Reid. Councillor Follows.
Just to double check, we're comfortable, are we, putting all the shared ownership down there in the bottom like that? Because I'm just assuming I can read that key correctly.
Yes, the cluster is smaller than the maximum within the emerging affordable housing SPD, and the affordable housing team have also looked at the siting of the affordable in the other phases, and they're satisfied it's an appropriate spatial distribution.
So in the case of this, also just listening to Councillor Townsend, it might be in the bottom of this particular bit like this, but across the entire set of things, it's broadly okay. Yeah, right, fine.
Thank you, Councillor Dinas.
I think you stole my thunder because I was going to ask exactly the same, but because I have a can I just ask, and again this is about knowledge. So Councillor Darcy's talked about sustainability, and we've talked about the SPD. Is there a way that we can have an additional condition that asks for them to submit details of their sustainability? As a condition that has to be submitted and agreed by the planning authority, because therefore we can have all those tick lists as part of our condition, and it would confirm our SPD. So the condition is they have to submit their sustainability that is agreed by us.
Thank you, Councillor Townsend.
I would say, Chair, as much as that would be, might be a nice to have, then it has to be something if they don't tick lots of boxes and they don't do anything. And bearing in mind, this is the last of 425 houses built across the site, and it was, validated prior to us introducing that. I think that, to be honest, it probably wouldn't be considered to be reasonable. Whilst, however, I wouldn't say the checklist. It might be nice to have a condition for them to confirm what they're going to have, gas or whatever boilers. Mind you, then again, I'm defeating my own argument there, because I'm just going around in a circle, because what are we going to do if they don't meet it? So I'd probably need Lewis's advice perhaps, or Chris's advice, or indeed Kate's advice on that one.
Thank you. We had a similar question come up at recent appeal about the use of such. Oh, sorry. And we had a similar question come up at a recent appeal from the inspector about the provision of a similar type of condition. And the difficulty is, unless it's specific and it says exactly what it's looking for, something broadly after sustainability measures probably doesn't meet the test in terms of being specific enough to be a condition. So I would suggest in this instance that's probably not the way to go in terms of a really broad condition. And obviously we do have conditions about vehicle charging and water usage, and as you say, the checklist will be coming forward on future applications that are being validated now. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We have Councillor Reid, then Councillor Darcy.
I'm rather disappointed that there is no area for children to play in this part of the development. And if it has to be accessed, how many roads would those children need to cross? I mean, quite a few, I would have thought. I mean, an open area public open area is not necessarily, most people regard that as a park area, you know, that looks pretty, but it's not a play area necessarily. So that's my disappointment.
The Darcy.
Yeah, I just wanted to read out something from the MPPF because I think it might be relevant to some of what we've just talked about, particularly the questions that were asked by Councillor Cossa. Paragraph 152, the planning system should support the transition to a low carbon future in a changing climate. It should help to shape places in ways that contribute to radical reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. I think that's pretty conclusive.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate the comments, Councillor, but I would suggest that these are probably more strategic issues, strategic planning issues that the Council will need to be looking at through the plan making process, through production of SPDs, local plans, etc., rather than issues that should be affecting us tonight without firm policies that we can rely on. It's very difficult to require certain things or refuse permissions on sustainability grounds. That would be my comment on the matter. But I appreciate concerns.
Thank you. I think we all do. Thank you very much for that helpful advice. So we have a recommendation in front of us that with conditions 1 to 18 and informatives 1 to 5, this permission for
Sorry,
reserve
Chair, and the amendment to condition 9, please.
and the amendment for condition 9. Thank you very much. How could I forget that this permission for reserved matters be approved? Would all in favour please show?
That's 10 in favour.
And those against?
None.
And abstentions?
Also none.
Okay, thank you. So I think at 7:24, we'll bring the meeting to an end, and happy Christmas, everyone.